Welcome to the 1990 BARC Firestone Production Car Championship, which travels through the north, south, east and west of England. And at the first round, it's Pembrey in Wales for a 1 hour, 2-driver endurance race. The cars having to change the drivers between 20 minutes and 40 minutes. Up to the hairpin for the first time, and it's Andy Middlehurst from Class A leading, and a Sierra Cosworth from Frank Greenaway in a similar car. Class B is headed by Guy Povey, whilst David Shedd tried the rallycross circuit, didn't like it and decided to go back onto the tarmac. Andy Middlehurst led for the first half until the driver changes, and then Guy Povey and Andrew Jeffrey took over in the BMW N3 and took it all the way to the checkered flag. Class A was won by Andy Middlehurst in the Sierra Cosworth, and receiving the garland for the race win was Guy Povey and Andrew Jeffrey. Andrew in the yellow suit from Scotland and Guy Povey in the white from Birmingham. Class C was won by Nigel Manners in a Volkswagen Golf GTI, and Brian Cox was second in a similar version after having destroyed his wife's car in practice. Class D was won by Tim Busby and Simon Munger, taking the lead on the last lap from Ray Arms and Brett Darrell. Down to the second round at Donington Park in Leicestershire, where we found the entries virtually oversubscribed, so 2 races were put onto the programme. Classes A and B in their race, and classes C and D took the field first. Looking from the buntings of Harrow car are Phil White in Class D. The Suzukis are mixing it with the Volkswagen Golfs already into the first corner. Tony Lanfranchi heads the field as we see Tim Busby's car, with the camera pointing backwards after winning last week's race, is being punted by David Kay and sent into a spin off onto the infield. David goes through as if nothing had happened. The rest of the Suzukis continue down the Craner curves, with Wayne Wainwright going up the inside trying to take the lead of Class D, just ahead of Brett Darrell. Suzuki Swifts racing here today are the Mark 1 and Mark 2 versions. A production car is defined in the regulations as one that was in production within the last 3 years. The Mark 1 was, as the Mark 2 now is, and the Mark 2s are giving us plenty of action as one takes to the infield and one takes to the outfield. From Wayne Wainwright's car, we can see Stephen Guglielmi locking up the brakes up the inside of George Batunas, sending George sideways as Wayne Wainwright takes defending action around the outside. We leave the Melbourne Loop and climb up to Goddard's before we turn left to the start and finish line. The Volkswagen Golf GTIs show their power up the hill, pulling away from the Suzuki Swift. At the head of the field is Tony Lanfranchi in the Vauxhall Astra, just ahead of Carl Jones in the Volkswagen Golf GTI, with the 2 Honda Civic GTIs coming through the field of Piers Johnson and Trevor Elliott. The Class D Suzuki Swift GTI is being headed by Wayne Wainwright, with Brett Darrell pressing very hard on his tail. Tim Busby, in his version that spun off on the first corner, is already halfway through the Suzuki Swifts, as Brett Woodley tries the outside line along the grass. Up to Coppice, we look at the outside of Wayne Wainwright's car, the red and white Hugate sponsored car. Wayne has just returned from America after racing there for many years and has taken to Class D, but is having trouble already as the smoke's pouring in from probably the damaged bodywork resting on a tyre at the back end of the car. How long can he survive in the lead, with Brett Darrell pushing hard in the pink Mark 1 version? Brett is very close to him now as they enter the Craner curves. Wayne rides the curve, Brett's right on his tail as they come down Craner, and Wayne soaring at the wheel, having problems, and the back end's going round on him. He's having to retire his car from this race as Brett Darrell goes through into an early lead. At the head of field, it's still Tony Lanfranchi coming through to take the checkered flag, just ahead of Nigel Manners. Brett Darrell leads, but Phil White's got onto his tail in the Mark 1 Suzuki Swift buntings of Harrow car, and up to the flag it's a chase, but he hasn't got enough power to overtake Brett Darrell before the flag falls. We now congratulate Tony Lanfranchi, who receives his garland for his first race win of the season, but his 489th win in his illustrious racing career. Brett Darrell receives his garland and his birthday boy for the 1st of April. Brett Darrell, no fool to be on the tracks with. Now for races A and B, and it's Ray McDowell in the Sierra Cosworth, blue and white from the front row, taking the lead. Headlight camera of Alan Hassel sees Frank Greenaway's side, with Ray McDowell going off into the distance, but look back in the field at the Lancia Integrale as he turns right and takes out Barry Robinson. The 4-wheel drive Integrale having too many wheels to cope with for the driver. And it's Ray McDowell leading in the Sierra Cosworth, just ahead of Andy Middlehurst, with Alan Hassel third as Frank Greenaway goes wide. Frank Greenaway having trouble at the chicane as well, just in front of Alan Hassel, spinning off. How Hassel missed him we don't know. From the headlight camera we can see how close it actually gets. Where's Greenaway? There he is as he goes straight past the headlight. As Alan Hassel doesn't flinch, he continues on his merry way. The checkered flag falls to Andy Middlehurst for his second win of the season, just ahead of Ray McDowell. Andy wins the wide from John Thrupp of Firestone and Guy Povey for Class B in his BMW M3. For Thruxton for round 3. Tony Lanfranchi's on pole position, but soon gets swallowed up by the Volkswagen Golf GTIs into the first corner, as Robin Parsons heads the field from Trevor Elliott and Stephen Guglielmi. But by the time we've got to Campbell Cobb and Seagrave, Robin Parsons has got Trevor Elliott, with Tony Lanfranchi recovered from about a 6th place to 3rd. Up to the chicane for the first time, and it's Tony Lanfranchi and Robin Parsons. Tony's in the lead as Robin's car surging terribly. It must have very soft shock absorbers, lifting a wheel right up in the air about a foot high as Lanfranchi goes through in the lead just ahead of Robin Parsons. As Steve Morris in the chicane rolls his Suzuki Swift out of the race and into a series of barrel rolls. The wipers are still working, and so is Steve. And we can see that the strong roll cage in his car saved his car from serious damage, and Steve as well, as Tony Lanfranchi takes the race win just ahead of Robin Parsons. Class D, it's Wayne Wainwright again, just ahead of Brett Darrell, who's got Stephen Guglielmi in between the two of them. Wayne Wainwright receives his first race win of the season. Class A and B, and it's Ray McDowell again, leading the field from the middle of the front row, with Michael Woodcock from the outside, and then Andy Middlehurst from pole position. Andy, not happy with 3rd place, asked Michael Woodcock to take to the grass so as he can go through in 2nd. Frank Greenaway taking 3rd. Down to Campbell, Cobb and Seagrave, and side by side it was Middlehurst and McDowell for most of the race. McDowell showing the way through on the 2nd part, but Andy comes through for the 3rd part. His bumper at the back end showing signs of early contact. Up to the chicane and past the checker flag, and it's Andy Middlehurst from Ray McDowell, still as close as ever. 3rd was Frank Greenaway, with Guy Povey, leader of Class B, almost through his boot lid. As Andy Middlehurst and Guy Povey go off in their lap of honour, we go to Silverstone to see virtually the same result. Andy taking the race win in Class A, Class B falling to Guy Povey, again in the Hugate-sponsored BMW M3. Another bottle of wine each, a hat and a garland for Guy Povey and Andy Middlehurst. And now for Classes C and D, we enter into a commentator's nightmare, as into the lead goes Tony Lanfranchi, just ahead of Alan Day from the outside of the front row. Then we have Piers Johnson ahead, and on the left is James Kay. James Kay now being pushed by Robbie Parsons as Alan Day goes through on the inside. Bill Stillwell goes sideways as Piers Johnson goes to the outside of the track onto the gravel. Leading, it's Tony Lanfranchi just ahead of James Kay. Then it's John Holloway being followed closely by Alan Day. Piers Johnson has recovered and come in the back of the field. Bill Stillwell spun again and is facing the wrong way. Leading Class D in the white Suzuki Swift is Phil White just ahead of Wayne Wainwright. Now John Holloway is being paid close attention by Robin Parsons, with Alan Day waiting to pounce. Looking at John Holloway, we go up to Maggots, but don't forget Lanfranchi and Kay are off into the lead as Robin Parsons is getting overexcited in the cockpit. Into Brooklands, and it's Lanfranchi heading Kay as Carl Hopkins knows a shortcut, goes off, does a handbrake turn and continues. Parsons and John Holloway side by side with Alan Day in close attention. Up to Copse, and it's Parsons from round the outside into 3rd place with Day in 4th and John Holloway into 5th. Piers Johnson now up to 6th, and a few laps later he gets past these 3 to take 3rd place. Holloway now in 4th, Alan Day in 5th. Over Guglielmi's shoulder into Brooklands, and it's Saunders and Devine touching and going sideways across the track. Saunders sent spinning with his bumper falling off, Devine continuing. And he's soon to inherit another position with Day exiting to the inside of the track, just ahead of Devine. Guglielmi had nothing to do but got 2 positions in 2 corners. Lanfranchi into Cops, oblivious of the fracas going on behind him, leads the field just ahead of James Kay. Guglielmi, now problems with the brakes, rams the back end of Robin Parsons' car and takes to the grass, straight across the gravel trap, back onto the grass and onto the track to continue his race. Parsons rests for a moment on the outside of the track, regaining his breath before he continues, as Guglielmi goes on as if nothing had happened. And it's Wainwright being pushed hard now by Phil White through Brooklands, sending Wainwright into a spin as Brett Darrell comes onto the scene to try and send Phil White into a spin through Luffield. But Phil keeps his foot down and ahead of Brett Darrell to the flag. Robin Parsons comes round as Piers Johnson goes across his front end and is sent spinning onto the inside of the track at Brooklands. We see from the outside, Piers spins, doesn't lose a position, gains first gear and continues just ahead of Bill Stillwell with Stephen Guglielmi in the background. Up to the flag and it's Lanfranchi for another win, just ahead of James Kay. Class D fell to Phil White, who got clear of Brett Darrell at the end. The 2 elder statesmen of the championship go off on the winner's car. Now to Brands Hatch for the next round, and it's a Class A and B cars on the Indy circuit. Brands Hatch is a very interesting circuit to drive as it rises and falls more than any other circuit in Europe. At the start, Ray McDowell from the second row shows how much power his car's got off the grid as he goes round the outside of Guy Povey and up alongside Michael Woodcock. Andy Middlehurst is into 3rd place with Guy Povey into 4th in the lead of Class B. From Alan Hassell's headlight camera, we can see the rear end of the red and white BMW of Graham Coombs. Through the left-hander at Surtees, we climb up into Clearways, where we meet the leader, Michael Woodcock, just ahead of Ray McDowell with Guy Povey and Andy Middlehurst. Possibly the longest journey for Ray McDowell this season, all the way down from Carlisle. He's about to try and take the lead from Michael Woodcock into Paddock and up to Druids. Michael retains it into Druids Hill, but on the exit, Ray McDowell is closer than ever. Andy Middlehurst in 3rd place is not very happy, as he's led the last 3 races and won them. Up into Clearways, and it's Michael Woodcock still leading from Ray McDowell, but Andy Middlehurst makes his charge and taps the back end of Ray McDowell, sending him spinning sideways and stopping in the middle of the track. He engages first gear, but it's too late because Frank Cundell comes through and hits the front end. Heavy damage to Frank Cundell's car as it retires to the pits, leaving Ray stranded in the middle of the track. And the red flags come out to stop the race as Ray's car is recovered and taken away. We can see the front end has been very heavily hit on the offside, and Frank Cundell's is severely damaged on the near side. The race is about to restart again, and at these lights, it's Michael Woodcock from the middle of the front row with Andy Middlehurst. Andy Middlehurst will get the drop to Paddock though because he's got the better line, as Guy Povey waits in 3rd place. Through Paddock for the first time, and it's Andy Middlehurst leading from Michael Woodcock up to Druids. Guy Povey's in 3rd, Gareth Howe 4th, and Alan Hassell into 5th. By Clearways, it's Andy Middlehurst into the lead, but Michael Woodcock, having led in the first race, wants to get back into the lead. He liked that position and is desperate to get there again. By the start and finish line, he's got it, but he leaves the door open for Middlehurst up to the inside at Paddock, but he holds him all the way round Paddock and up to Druids. Again, Michael leaves the door open as Andy swaps to the inside and dives through to take the lead. Guy Povey in 3rd isn't able to take a charge onto these 2 cars as Andy Middlehurst leads across the checkered flag from Michael Woodcock with Guy Povey in 3rd place. Povey and Middlehurst receives their garlands for the lap of honour as the Class C cars have already got to Paddock, and in the lead it's the Volkswagen Golf GTI of Carl Hopkins. Brands Hatch is probably a better circuit for the Class C and D cars, as it's a very tight, twisty up and down circuit. The Sierra Cosworths can't really show their power potential on these bends. They need the long straights of Silverstone and Thruxton, where they can really put the power down and pull away from the other cars. Class D is very close, and it's Wayne Wainwright again, leading from Phil White with Brett Darrell. Tim Busby trying to make a dive for the inside. Brett Darrell's not an easy man to pass. Wayne Wainwright is pulling away from the rest of the field. This Mark II Suzuki version very much dominant on this circuit. At the head of the field is Carl Jones as James Kay goes sideways through Druids Hill Bend, but doesn't lose a position and gets on behind Tony Lanfranchi. Lanfranchi's in 3rd place. Trevor Elliott in the Honda Civic, behind Stephen Guglielmi in the Duckham-sponsored Volkswagen Golf GTI. Down into Graham Hill Bend, the left-hander, we're about to enter into Surtees before we climb into clearways. Wainwright still leading from Phil White, with Brett Darrell still in third place. Tim Busby, now a bit further down the field, trying very hard, slides off into the gravel trap where he'll be stuck for the rest of the race, as once you enter the gravel you can't get out. Brett Woodley decides to back his car into the tyres at clearways as Carl Hopkins goes through with a healthy lead now from the other Volkswagen Golfs and Vauxhall Astras. Second is Alan Day from Tony Lanfranchi, with James Kay still in fourth. John Holloway, further down the field than he likes to be, is about to be overtaken by Trevor Elliott, unlike Stephen Guglielmi, who decides to push him out of the way to get past. Whilst up on top straight, the first win in the championship this year is Carl Hopkins collecting the checkered flag just ahead of Tony Lanfranchi and Alan Day. Wayne Wainwright receives his garland once again for the win in Class D. Now to Mallory Park, and it's Tony Lanfranchi and Carl Hopkins having another battle, but Stephen Guglielmi's up into third place. Class C this time is quite depleted as not many cars made the journey up to Leicester, whereas Class D is well oversubscribed as they try to attack Tim Busby. He's flavour of the day and everybody wants to have a hit as they go through the hairpin. Brett Darrell goes off into the distance in the lead, just ahead of Steve Morris. Whilst on the main straight, Michelle Hedwoods tangles with James Roseblade and spins sideways, just about to be missed by Phil White's car. Up to the head of the field, Bill Stillwell. He's coming upon Robin Parsons. Out of Gerrard's and up to the S's. He's in fourth place. Tony Lanfranchi and Carl Hopkins going off into the lead. Stephen Guglielmi's in third place. And Bill Stillwell's now up to fourth. Robin Parsons fifth. And Piers Johnson sixth. John Holloway seventh. Alan Day eighth. And Trevor Elliott in the other Honda Civic in ninth place. Carl Hopkins and Tony Lanfranchi are now pulling away from this field. Tony Lanfranchi in the Vauxhall Astra wasn't supposed to shine this day at Mallory Park, as the Astra doesn't handle too well on this circuit, but nobody told Tony Lanfranchi. Through Gerrard's, you see the back end of the cars bouncing away as the front end pulls the car around with the front wheels drive. Bill Stillwell comes upon Stephen Guglielmi down to the S's, which is a flat in third, right, left, right kink, as Guglielmi leads Stillwell through in third place, the back end stepping out of line momentarily in the middle of the circuit. Now it's Barry Pearson's turn to come upon Wayne Wainwright. He takes the inside, but Wainwright doesn't like it and pushes him wide onto the grass. Barry keeps his foot down, gets back onto the track and doesn't lose a position into the S's. Up into the hairpin, and it's Guglielmi still in third place in the blue and yellow Volkswagen Golf GTI as John Holloway comes upon Alan Day and gets hit in the side. Round onto the main straight, and Bill Stillwell's following Piers Johnson as they come upon David Munro's Mark II Suzuki Swift GTI. David, amongst the thick of it, gets pushed to the outside as the other cars go through on the inside. Bill dives for the inside line and takes Piers Johnson to regain fourth place. Stephen Guglielmi now ahead of him for third. Through Gerrard's and the back end of the cars hanging out, but they keep their foot flat down on the floor to make the front wheels pull the back end round. Down the back straight and up to the S's again, and Bill Stillwell's closer this time than before as Guglielmi's swapping from side to side. His light's coming on very early and Bill Stillwell taps the back end into the S's as Stevens slides across the grass, loses two positions and gets back onto the track. Now he's swallowed up by the following group. Carl Hopkins comes around Devil's Elbow to come down and collect the checkered flag. Second place falls to Tony Lanfranchi, but up at the hairpin, third place is still being heavily disputed as Bill Stillwell meets Piers Johnson on the outside and is smashed into the side, his head going from side to side, misses a gear and Piers goes through to take third place, Bill falling to fourth. Lead of Class D will fall to Brett Darrell in the pink and white Mark I Suzuki Swift GTI. Brett receiving the winner's garland for the second time this season and a kiss from Emma Boswell of the BARC, whilst Carl Hopkins receives his congratulations from his one and only fan. Over to the A and B cars for their race, and on pole position it's Andy Middlehurst from Ray McDowell and Michael Woodcock on the outside of the front row. Frank Cundell in his rebuilt version starts from virtually the back of the field but decides to take to the grass to try and gain some positions on the drag up to Gerrard's. Into Gerrard's for the first time, it's Andy Middlehurst just ahead of Ray McDowell. Third place is Frank Greenaway and Michael Woodcock. David Chedd trying to go around the outside in his Sapphire Cosworth of George Polly. George Polly takes to the grass, very used to having a sideways car because he's an ex-hot rod racing driver. Into the S's for the first time, and it's Andy Middlehurst. And the faster speed of the Sierra Cosworths up to the hairpin means the brakes have to work a lot harder than the previous race. The brakes really getting hammered in this, and sometimes they get hammered too much in the back end as well, as Michael Woodcock is sent into a spin facing the centre of the track. No need to ask who hit him, because we soon see Mark Hughes carrying the bumper underneath his car. It's Andy Middlehurst from Ray McDowell pulling away from Frank Greenaway, under pressure now from David Shedd in 4th place. Alan Hessel's headlight camera shows how the brakes take a hammering, and sometimes the back end again. This time it was Barry Robinson. The Sierra Cosworths are fitted with ABS braking. This means anti-bashing systems. Barry Robinson continues at the back of the field. Alan Hassel continues with his bumper and bonnet very badly damaged, as Derek Seawood damages his front end against the tyre barriers at Gerrard's and gets out quite well, but checks to see if the tyres are still inflated. Yes, they are. George Polly now decides to try and test the reactions of Kerry Nash and Guy Povey as he puts them wide at the S's. Back to the front, and it's Andy Middlehurst with Ray McDowell, who's getting it back to front into the gravel trap as his brakes fail, who hides his embarrassment in the dust and hands an easy win to Andy Middlehurst, who's miles ahead of the second place man, as Andy comes through to collect the checkered flag for another win in this season of racing. Guy Povey receives his hat from David Shedd, who was trying to make a small one fit on a big head. Down to Brands Hatch for the second visit of the year. And at the start, it's Carl Hopkins into the lead from the outside of the front row, ahead of Alan Day, with Piers Johnson from the second row into 4th place already. Where's Tony Lanfranchi? He's at the back of the field after having a bad practice, as James Biscoe spins it away in paddock. Up into clearways, and it's still Carl Hopkins leading the Volkswagen Golf GTI in his first season of saloon car racing. And it's Class D, and who else is leading but Wayne Wainwright, just ahead of Brett Darrell again. Up to the start and finish line, and they're still at it, those two, the two from Birmingham, Wainwright and Darrell. James Brosblade's car over the brow at paddock, and down he gets pushed from the back end and sent wide at paddock, losing 2 positions, and 3 as Steve Morris comes through on the inside. Steve Morris, making a good start from the back of the field, is halfway through already. Just ahead is Richard Denby and Brett Woodley to their outside. Wainwright and Darrell losing the back end as they go round clearways, collect it together and continue past the start and finish line for another lap. James Roseblade decides it's time to take Michelle Edwards on the inside at Surtees, but there's not enough room, so he has to wait till they get up to clearways and then swaps to try and take him on the inside line at clearways. In the meantime, Michael White's been watching and feels it's a lot safer on the grass, away from the hectic battle on the track. Coming out of clearways, Roseblade sees a gap, goes for it, but Michelle Edwards says no, it's not there, and tries to shut the door as his back wing touches the front of Roseblade. Up into Druids, and it's Darrell looking up, sending smoke signals to the rest of the pack, trying to get through on the inside of Wainwright. But Wainwright holds the lead right the way through to the checkered flag. Brett Darrell coming through in second place. Carl Hopkins, who won the race overall, was in between the 2 Class D drivers. Now over to the grid for the Class A and Class B race, and as the lights go to green, it's Frank Greenaway from the middle of the front row, taking the field ahead of Andy Middlehurst and Guy Povey. David Shedd tries to take the inside in 4th place, as Ray McDowell comes round the outside from the 4th row to be alongside George Polly, touching towels as they exit paddock. Up into Druids, and it's Ray McDowell still ahead, as David Shedd tries to go round the outside of Andy Middlehurst, but Andy will have none of that as he holds on to second place. David drops into 3rd, just ahead of Guy Povey with Michael Woodcock 4th. Looking from the headlight camera, now fitted to Michael Woodcock's car, Guy Povey's ahead with David Shedd just in front of him. Frank Greenaway wants to make a good impression today because his sponsors from Gascard Textiles are all the way down from the Yorkshire Dales. He still leads into Paddock Bend with making Andy Middlehurst go around the outside. Michael Woodcock's now up into 3rd place ahead of David Shedd. But how long will Frank be safe in 1st place? Because we know from previous races Andy Middlehurst doesn't like to be in 2nd place and will use everything at his disposal to get to the head of the field. Is Frank pulling away? They go round Surtees and up into clearways. And it's Frank still ahead, but Andy swapping to the outside. Soon he will make his charge to the head of the field. Past the start and finish line. And Frank's holding the inside line up to paddock. Andy's round the outside. He shuts the door on Andy as Andy dives for the inside, but there's not enough room there. And yes, he pushes him right round and past he goes into the lead. Michael Woodcock through into second, David Shedd into third, Bray McDowell into fourth, Guy Povey into fifth, as Frank Greenaway collects it together and continues, but there's something wrong with the car as one of the tyres is fast deflating because when he touched with Andy Middlehurst, the valve was ripped out of the wheel and he will retire to the pits, unfortunately after a very good showing at the head of the field. Having learnt today from his experience that if you've got Andy Middlehurst behind you, make sure he's a long way behind you. As Andy comes past the checkered flag to take his 6th win of the season. Second is Michael Woodcock, and Guy Povey leads Class B, as the usual picture of Guy Povey and Andy Middlehurst going off into the distance. No sooner had the checkered flag fallen at Brands Hatch that the mechanics were already packing away the goods and the cars to travel north to Knockhill, the furthest north we've been for a long, long time. Knockhill circuit, very twisty, very tight. It's a cross between Cadwell and Lyddon, if you've never seen it. At the start, Piers Johnson was pushed off and Biscoe went to the outside, taking Tony Lanfranchi with him. Two of the race favourites gone right to the back of the field. Piers Johnson is in the tyres and waiting for a push to rejoin, and Tony Lanfranchi is already back on the track amongst the Suzukis. Piers, with the front end slightly battered on the near side, gets going again. At the head of the field is Carl Hopkins, just ahead of Trevor Elliott, Piers' teammate. John Holloway's in third and Saunders in fourth. Alan Day's in fifth. Tony Lanfranchi, already past the Suzuki battle, has got the battling class leaders Wayne Wainwright and Brett Darrell on his tail. James Biscoe is just behind this pair. Carl Hopkins, followed by Trevor Elliott, still at the lead, and Holloway, Saunders and Day next up. Lanfranchi in sixth, and there's a battle for Class D, with Brett Darrell in the luminous or fluorescent pink car just ahead of Wainwright, the Mark II version. Third is the battling Mark I Suzukis of Barry Pearson and Phil White. Hopkins leading Elliott, Holloway, Saunders and Day. No change at the front, but Lanfranchi's beginning to get onto the back end of Alan Day. Darrell's pulling away from Wainwright, with James Biscoe stuck between them now, the meat between a Suzuki sandwich. Trevor Elliott applying the pressure, but to himself, not to Carl Hopkins, as he loses the back end and slides it round onto the grass, allowing Holloway, Saunders and Day through, losing 3 positions in that foul manoeuvre. Tony Lanfranchi will soon be on his tail, as Holloway now gets second place, Saunders in third and Day in fourth, with Trevor Elliott, who's made a big mistake, the managing director of Honda UK, in front of the Scottish Honda dealers who have come down for this race today. But Elliott pulls out, is about to go straight past Day and get onto Saunders' tail. Battle for Class D, and they're coming up on the tail ender. And it's Wainwright and Darrell side by side as they approach Duffer's Dip. Now this could be interesting because the tail ender is Andrew Jeffries, who is the teammate of Wainwright, but he's going slow because he has problems and has gone into the pits. Or is he? He seems to have speeded up just in front of Darrell, and now he may be able to help Wainwright go through at the right moment. Darrell can't lose any time, he's got to get past him as quick as he can because he can't lose the points to Wainwright at this meeting. It's vital at this point of the season. But Andrew Jeffrey seems to be speeding up and certainly has helped Wainwright come through at Taylor's hairpin ahead of Darrell. Darrell pushes the back end of Wainwright, sending it sideways, but Wainwright's got enough power to pull it out of the corner. Andrew Jeffrey must have looked into the mirror because he's pulled over now and is about to let the leaders through without any more hindrance now that his teammate's in the lead of the class. But down to Duffer's Dip, Brett Darrell tries another manoeuvre around the outside, but there's not enough room and it's Wainwright leading through. Jeffrey seems to be pulling well away from these two. Will he be able to unlap himself and lead the class before the end, as Darrell, trying everything, goes onto the grass and loses more time? At the head of the field, it's Carl Hopkins coming across to collect the checkered flag, and a marvellous recovery for Trevor Elliott in front of the Honda crowd, taking second place overall. Carl Hopkins receives his garland from John Thrupp, and John Thrupp turns Wayne around as it's Wayne's world today. There wasn't a full complement in classes A and B, and the winners were Andy Middlehurst and Guy Povey. Down to Snetterton in Norfolk. From the long trek north, it was 1 week later and the cars appeared on the grid. And at the front this time, it was Mike Devine. Mike Devine was leading from Carl Hopkins, just ahead of Stephen Guglielmi and Alan Day, the two Honda Civic VTECs going down the field. Tony Lanfranchi back in about 6th place, not in his usual customary position, leading the championship at the moment, but Piers Johnson is slowly making inroads into his lead. Class D cars leave 10 seconds later. There was a very healthy entry for the Suzuki Swifts, and it was decided it would be safer in the first corner to have the different classes arriving at different times. 1 week later, and last week's winner is this week's leader. It's Wayne Wainwright, just ahead of Brett Darrell, and either side of Brett Darrell is Phil White and Barry Pearson. Barry swaps to the inside right behind Phil White and tries to help his Birmingham teammate Brett Darrell. Down the back straight, and it's Wayne Wainwright pulling well ahead of the Class D 2nd, 3rd and 4th places. At the head of the field, it's Mike Devine from Carl Hopkins, Stephen Guglielmi, Alan Day, John Holloway and Tony Lanfranchi. The two Honda Civics are right behind Tony, putting a lot of pressure on him, and Piers wants to get past to increase his points lead. Wainwright, he's ahead of these three, and it's Barry Pearson, Brett Darrell, and in the inside is Phil White in the white car. Round into the bomb hole, it's still Wainwright leading from Brett Darrell, Barry Pearson now trying to protect his back end. Devine's got the head of the field, Tony Lanfranchi's in 4th place as Trevor Elliott tries to come up the inside of John Holloway into the first corner at Russell. Darrell's now pulling away from Barry Pearson. Barry seems to be holding back Phil White, and Michael White, Phil's brother, is guesting in this race in a new car. Carl Hopkins trying to get on turns with Mike Devine, but Mike seems to have found something new to his car that's pulling away from the rest of the field. The two Honda Civic VTECs putting a lot of pressure on the back end of John Holloway's car, who's got Tony Lanfranchi in front of them, locking up and going into the gravel trap. Tony Lanfranchi's race will be run, but no, like God, he walks on water or walks on gravel. Tony gets out of it and rejoins, only losing 1 position. Brett Darrell's now got past Wainwright. There must have been something wrong because he reeled him in within 2 laps and went straight past him. But down to the chicane, and what happens, it's Wainwright touching Darrell, pushing him off and into the gravel trap, almost turning the car over as he slides sideways. Barry Pearson comes through in 2nd place, and Phil White's dropped back, but still in 3rd. Barry Pearson, his anger very evident, is on a charge now to avenge his teammate who was pushed off on the last corner. Brett Darrell never gives up and tries to lift his car out of the gravel trap. Superhuman strength is not enough. It cannot budge. Before the next corner, Pearson's right on the tail of Wainwright, and he's about to take the position from Wainwright, the lead of the race. Up to the old hairpin. Wainwright's only 2 car lengths ahead of Pearson as Pearson closes under braking up on 2 wheels. He's giving no quarter to the back end of Wainwright now. Down to the chicane for the next time, and the yellow flags are out for Brett Darrell, who's out in the gravel, as Pearson tries to go through and up the inside, barging his way through past Wainwright. And he's now in the lead of the class. Wainwright won't give up and drops in straight behind Barry to gain the drag along the top straight. At the head of the field, it's still Mike Devine. Carl Hopkins, trying everything he knows, cannot get on terms with this car of Mike's. Mike's really got it going well. Guglielmi was also going well in 3rd place from Day, and then the 2 Honda Civic twins have come up through the field. Piers Johnson, though, loses it into the chicane in front of Trevor Elliott and straight across his bows. How we missed him, we don't know. He goes into the tyre wall and then pulls the car out, rejoins just behind Tony Lanfranchi. Lanfranchi will be pleased to keep Piers Johnson behind him because that's one who's eating into his points lead. Wainwright, however, is having a lot of trouble with the handling of his car. Coming sideways, you can see the Suzuki Swift shouldn't be at that angle as it comes round the long Russell bend. The red car behind was not Pearson but Michael White, and the checkered flag falling to Mike Devine overall, just ahead of Carl Hopkins, and 3rd place going to Stephen Guglielmi. Barry Pearson collects the honours for Class D, but was to soon lose it as he overtook under a yellow flag and was disqualified in the day's race. Now we go over to see the start of the A and B race. After 30 yards, the race was stopped due to Alan Hassel taking to the Armco very quickly, carrying the headlight camera for MOW video. The incident seen from outside, Alan was tapped behind by one of the Sierra Cosworth, sent into a spin, into the barriers and off into the boondocks. The race was stopped and restarted. At the restart, it was Andy Middlehurst leading from Frank Greenaway, David Shedd, Gareth Howe, Guy Povey, Michael Woodcock and Matthew Mortlock. The last two being quite a mouthful as they both share the same cars belonging to Michael Woodcock. At the lead is Andy Middlehurst pulling away from Frank Greenaway and David Shedd, Gareth Howe having his race-long battle with Guy Povey, and coming through the field was Michael Woodcock and Kerry Nash. Andy Middlehurst comes through to collect the checkered flag after 15 laps, just ahead of David Shedd, who managed to get past Frank Greenaway. Then we had Michael Woodcock just ahead of Kerry Nash in the Sapphire Cosworth. Kerry trying everything at the last corner, sliding the back end out, but not enough to get on terms with Michael. And then Gareth Howe keeping Guy Povey at bay throughout the whole race. Guy, though, happy to finish just behind him and lead Class B. Andy Middlehurst from Liverpool and Guy Povey from Birmingham receive their garlands. Straight across country now to Donington, and it's a 500-kilometre race. About 4 to 5 hours it will take, depends on the weather conditions. The cars will have to come in and have tyre changes, fuel and brake pads. And at the head of the field, it's Frank Greenaway just ahead of Guy Povey from Kerry Nash. Where's Andrew Middlehurst? There he is. He had to start from the back of the grid after a technical infringement and had his practice time disallowed. So it's Frank Greenaway leading from Kerry Nash and Guy Povey. Andy Middlehurst already halfway through the field. There he is. He's up to 5th place. Del Delaron from Wales, 6th. David Oates, 7th. Frank Cundell, 8th. Then the first of the Honda Civics. Now these Civics have just received their VTEC engine. This is the variable timing exhaust control, which gives them extra revs when the valve timing changes halfway through the rev range. The extra power is certainly showing at this race, and Carl Hopkins is having a lot of trouble trying to stay on turns with them. Barry Pearson, first of the pit visitors from Birmingham, about to hand over to Steve Morris. Piers Johnson, Trevor Elliott car, they're together in the car today, and the second car is being driven by Daley Thompson. Frank Cundell's coming to have tyres and brakes, and the smoke coming up there is Tony Lanfranchi. Now he had some new brake pads coming from America, but unfortunately it didn't work too well. They set the brakes alight, burnt the discs, burnt the bearings and melted the grease. Andy Middlehurst has come in for his pit change. The air jack's taking the car up in the air as Slim Bulgood is about to enter the driver's seat. Roger Dowson, working on the back end, is having trouble with the brake pads. They won't come out as they seem to have overheated and seized in. Andrew Jeffrey is about to take over from Guy Povey in the leader of Class B. There is only a certain amount of people that are allowed to work on a car in a long distance race, and the driver cannot get back into the car until the refueling's taken place. Julian Burton there having a misdemeanor at the bottom of the Craner curves, and here it's Daley Thompson. He saw the gravel trap, thought it was a long jump and tried for it. He's rejoined the race. This is Andrew Jeffrey, who's had problems with the leader of Class B, and the car had brake problems. The brakes burnt, boiled, and he put it into the barriers. Unfortunately, he's got to go back to Guy Povey and explain what happened. This is Daley Thompson having another spin onto the grass. 5 hours gone, and the leaders coming round on their last lap. Leading Class A and overall is Andy Middlehurst, 1 lap to go. Leading Class B after everybody's had a go in the lead of it is David Oates in the Ceratec sponsored car. Half a lap to go, and he'll collect the checkered flag for his first win of the season as he's down underneath the Dunlop Bridge and the car starts smoking. The brakes gave problems as they locked up, caught fire, and he had to pull over and was unable to complete the last half a lap. Andy Middlehurst takes the checkered flag. Class B went to Del Delaron, but David Oates was deemed to have completed more laps and was later awarded the win. Class C went to Carl Hopkins and Stephen Guglielmi, and Class D went to the Knobbly Knees competition of Brett Darrell and Ray Arms. Stephen Guglielmi on the right and Carl Hopkins on the left receive it for Class C. Class B went to Del Delaron and Ken Grundy. Ken was the slightly balding gentleman. And Class A went to Andy Middlehurst, an ex-Formula 1 driver and ABBA drummer, Slim Borgood.
I'm smiling.
As Guy Povey said, he's not smiling after practice, as his championship hopes look very dented, with his car ending up backwards into the barriers, but they jacked it apart between a big lorry and a Range Rover. Leaders over the early laps were Ray McDowell for Class A, Guy Povey in Class B, Piers Johnson in the Honda Civic VTEC Class C, and Class D was Wayne Rainwright. At the back end it was David Oates in a borrowed car after we saw what happened to his car at Donington. Andy Middlehurst was paying close attention to the back end of Ray McDowell's car. Michael Woodcock was coming through the field. Art Marcus was holding Frank Greenaway at bay. Class C was being held by Piers Johnson just ahead of Carl Hopkins. A race-long battle now that the Honda Civics have got their new engine. Class D, it was Wainwright and Darrell again, battling at the head. Wainwright pulled away from Darrell, with a battle-scarred Suzuki Swift managed to cross the line and take the checkered flag. Winners on the rostrum at Oulton Park in Cheshire were Class A, Andy Middlehurst, Class B, Guy Povey, newcomer to the rostrum, Class C, Piers Johnson, and Class D, Wayne Wainwright. Piers receives the garland. Now we go down south for the penultimate round of the championship, and on pole position it's Andy Middlehurst again, but from the outside it's Ray McDowell in the ECM-sponsored Sierra Cosworth taking the lead. The Class A battle has been settled for the leader in the championship, and that's Andy Middlehurst. And the Class B battle has been settled to Guy Povey. But either Andy or Guy could win the championship overall. Class C, that's not yet settled. It could be Carl Hopkins, Piers Johnson or Tony Lanfranchi. And Class D, well, they're still going at it, and they'll be going at it right the way down to the end of the line between Brett Darrell and Wayne Wainwright. The hard-charging Andy Middlehurst is this time intimidated by Ray McDowell, who takes the lead through the chicane. Michael Woodcock in third from Frank Greenaway in fourth. Guy Povey leading Class B from Del Delaron, and it's Piers Johnson just ahead of Carl Hopkins, with Tony Lanfranchi in third and Trevor Elliott in fourth. Class D is being led by Brett Darrell from Phil White and Wayne Wainwright. Phil can only win the Class D if Wayne Wainwright and Brett Darrell fall off in both races, and that is very unlikely. At the head of the field, Andy Middlehurst is certainly being put under a lot of pressure by Ray McDowell. Class B, Guy Povey's got quite a healthy lead from his second competitor, who is the Welshman Del Delaron. Class C, that's being battled out by Piers Johnson just ahead of Carl Hopkins, who's pushing him all the way. The Honda Civic VTEC we thought would pull away from the Volkswagen Golf GTI, but it's not that easy. There's Piers Johnson now, got Kerry Nash and David Oates between him and Carl Hopkins. Ken Balker all the way down from Cheshire. Third in Class C, Tony Lanfranchi, as Alan Day decides to sit it out in the chicane and see how it should be taken. Looking from Barry Pearson's car up to chicane, and a dust cloud rises. Simon Munger's on his outside as they enter. Simon comes across trying to push Barry wide. What happened is Brett Darrell, he's on his roof as Simon Munger touches the front wing. There's the person who pushed Brett Darrell. It was Simon's teammate and usual driver of this car, Tim Busby, who's decided to take a Class B drive for this race. Brett Darrell down, well, upside down, but not out, as they right the car back onto its wheels. Brett Darrell jumps into the driver's seat to get pushed off of the track, but Brett has other ideas as he starts the car on the battery and drives off. He thinks he can still catch up with the class leader, who's almost half a lap ahead. Ken Balker, all the way from Cheshire, unfortunately retires the car, smoking very heavily. The car went very well in practice today, giving a new engine note we hadn't heard all season. Guy Povey hops over the curbs as Steve Morris and Michelle Edwards tries to do a pas-de-deux in the middle of the chicane. Del Delaron comes through as Michelle Edwards rejoins the fray. Back to almost ahead of the field and second place battle between Michael Woodcock and Ray McDowell. Ray soaring at the steering wheel more than a timber merchant as he tries to get on terms with Michael Woodcock, who's taken his second place away from him. Andy Middlehurst comes through in the lead of Class A to take the checkered flag. Second, through to the line, it should be Michael Woodcock, who's got Ray McDowell all over the back end as they come through the chicane. Ray dives for the inside to run along the pit wall, but is there enough room as he tries to get through, and yes, takes second place from Michael Woodcock on the line. Guy Povey comes through at the head of Class B as he overtakes fellow Brummie Brett Darrell around the outside, but Brett doesn't see him and touches. Brett is a lap down on the rest of the field. Piers Johnson comes through to lead Class C in the new Honda Civic VTEC, the second win of the season for Piers, and Wayne Wainwright wins Class D. 2 weeks later, we return to Thruxton for the final round of the 1990 BARC Production Saloon Car Championship. As Dennis Carter, chairman of the BARC, pushes the green light, it's a go, and it's Andy Middlehurst leading from pole position. Round the outside was coming Guy Povey, but it's Ray McDowell who velcros himself to the back end of Andy Middlehurst for the complex at the first time. Gary James decides to go through the traffic, but it was a shortcut that didn't pay off, as Steve Morris bounces the back end of the Suzuki Swift around and loses 2 positions. Ray McDowell shows Andy Middlehurst that he can do what Andy's done to everybody else all season. Across the start and finish line, and it's Ray McDowell leading Andy Middlehurst from Michael Woodcock. Then it's Guy Povey just ahead of Slim Ballgood in Frank Gundell's BMW M3. He's been putting the car for this race to try and hold off Guy Povey. As Chaz Hile, newcomer Baker from Wentworth, has his first race on his first lap, has his first spin and retires. Ray McDowell now with Michael Woodcock round the outside, demoting Andy Middlehurst to 3rd place. Guy Povey on the back end of Andy tries to take the position as they go through Campbell, Cobb and Seagrave. Michael Woodcock comes through in 2nd place, Guy Povey's now in 3rd, and Andy Middlehurst is back to 4th, soon to become in the clutches of Slim Ballgood. Ray McDowell pulling away from Michael Woodcock round the back end of Kimpton. Michael comes upon his tail, shows him that he's still there as they come up to the chicane, and says, we'll finish our battle we had at the last round. Ray goes across the start and finish line to lead again. Michael's in 2nd. Leading Class C, it's the Honda Civic VTEC twins, but it's Trevor Elliott heading Piers Johnson. Carl Hopkins in 3rd, Mike Devine in 4th. Bill Stillwell in 5th, as Stephen Day in father Michael Day's car spins it out with John Holloway at the chicane, allowing Tony Lanfranchi to go through and James Biscoe. Heading Class D, it's Wayne Wainwright. As Ray McDowell throws up the dust in Woodcock's face ahead of Guy Povey, with Slim Ballgood in 4th, and now Andy Middlehurst in 5th with Frank Greenaway on his tail. McDowell slides it through the chicane over the curb, with the flames spewing out the side of Woodcock's car just ahead of Guy Povey, Slim Ballgood, and Andy Middlehurst still there, still got plenty to do with about 10 laps to go. Up the inside it's Slim Ballgood driving straight past Guy Povey and a 6-sounding BMW M3 past the pits. Guy Povey falling backwards very quickly. This car's been reliable for the whole season except for Donington, and now it's fouled again. Slim Ballgood heads the field from Del Delaronde with David Oates now in 3rd in Class B. Guy Povey's fallen back to 4th. Brett Darrell goes up the inside of Phil White to the chicane. Brett Darrell trying to do on Phil White what Phil White did the lap before on Brett Darrell. Povey keeping his foot down straight behind the headlight in 4th gear, as much power as he can muster from the engine over the curbs. He's not changing for the corners, he's just keeping the foot flat to the floor as round the outside goes the Class D leader, Wayne Wainwright. About to be swallowed up by Brett Darrell and Phil White, also being approached by Gary James and Neilson Cox, who spun on the early laps. Brett Darrell cheekily tries to go around the outside of Kerry Nash in the Oracle Sapphire Cosworth, which seems to be getting in the way of the 1300 Suzuki Swift GTI. He's all over the back end, but now the Cosworth pulls away into the distance as Brett waves it goodbye. Michael Woodcock still heading, but it's Andy Middlehurst in 3rd place from Slim Ballgood in 4th. Bill Stillwell knows a shortcut over the curbs, but it doesn't work when Tony Lanfranchi is behind him, so he waves to the camera and has a picnic. Up to the chicane, and it's Brett Darrell just ahead of Phil White, but the white way through the chicane is with Phil White ahead of Brett Darrell. Up to the start and finish line, and Phil's in 2nd place. Brett Darrell desperate to get past him and try and get on the tail of Wayne Wainwright to win the class in the championship, but Phil White has different ideas. Up to the Campbell, Cobb and Seagrave, and now the Volkswagen Golfs are getting in the way as Gary James comes past Brett Darrell. They have their own race to run and are sorry that the Suzukis are quicker. As Brett pushes Phil White sideways, Gary gets in amongst them on the exit and splits the 2 cars. Brett Darrell will have something to say as they go round the back. The 16-valve Golf, don't forget his 1.8 litre, as it comes alongside Brett Darrell, pulls between the 2 and is a meet in a Suzuki sandwich. Phil White doesn't give enough room. The speed of the Suzuki in the corner is equal to the Volkswagen Golf GTI, the weight being the penalty to the Volkswagen. Round the back, and the Suzuki is catching the Golf, and Brett Darrell gesticulates that he's in the way. At the head of the field, it's still Ray McDowell, but second place is being hotly contested between Michael Woodcock and Andy Middlehurst. Ray, never having led a race for this long before, is getting bored out at the front, as Andy Middlehurst can see his championship hopes are still alive once Guy Povey went down the back of the field. Through the complex, and Andy Middlehurst has had enough and decides to take another position, with a move that's not in the rule book. Michael Woodcock spins off into the tyres and gets stuck into the gravel, and his race has been run for the day. Tyre-smoking Gary James with Ilsa Cox behind him has Phil White and Brett Darrell still up their chuff through the complex for the next lap. Up one class, and the lead is still being disputed between Trevor Elliott and Piers Johnson. Carl Hopkins now dropping back behind Mike Devine. Up to the chicane, with the afternoon sun now in Brett Darrell's eyes, right behind Phil White, Guy Povey has got second wind as he goes round the outside. The trouble seems to have cleared itself in the BMW. Phil White tries to find a chink in Brett's armour, but that joust wasn't enough, as Phil gets inverted onto his roof and Brett Darrell goes through in second place. The race is stopped because the car is in a very awkward position at the chicane, and the result declared a lap previous, which is very lucky for Brett Darrell as his cam belt snapped at the complex. So he was awarded third place, Phil White in second. Brett gets towed in behind the tow truck. Winners on the rostrum were at the head of the field, Ray McDowell. Class B was Slim Borgood, Class C was Trevor Elliott, and Class D Wayne Wainwright. But at post-race scrutineering, Ray McDowell was disqualified due to too much boost. Andy Middlehurst won the race and the class and the championship. Andy Middlehurst with 93 points, from Frank Greenaway with 37 and David Shedge with 20. Class B, Guy Povey had 83, not enough to win the championship, but Del Delaronde had 40 in second, equal with David Oates. Class C fell to Carl Hopkins with 49 points in the Volkswagen Golf GTI, Tony Lanfranchi in the Astra GTE was second with 44, and Piers Johnson with the Honda Civic VTEC with 33. Class D finally fell to Wayne Wainwright with 61, from Brett Darrell with 52, and Phil White with 44. Thanks for joining us in 1990, and we'll be back with more action in 1990.